Hi, this is Richard Grieco for RunItOnce.com. This is going to be the first part of a new MTT review, this time from a 10k PLO event during Scoop 2019. Going to mix things up this time and look to work in some solver analysis here and there. I think a lot of shallow stack, low SPR, pre and post flop scenarios can represent pretty murky waters for some people who are very experienced in other formats. Even shorter stack cash tends to work quite differently given the pre-flop ranges you end up with. And so it'll be quite interesting to see what additional insights we can stumble across with the aid of software. I am, though, going to make an effort to be more restrictive with its usage than in other video series, just because, as you can see, we have quite a few hands to get through. We're starting at the beginning of the tournament this time, or at least the beginning of my participation in the tournament. As a matter of practice, I usually register these events once tables are already formed. You can sometimes pick up a little bit of additional EV from seat selection in events of this size, and given that in a 10k, edges are going to run pretty small, every little helps. We've landed on a table with a couple of tough regs to our left. Danfu is probably the more solid of the two. This is the kind of opponent who just rarely makes a mistake. Like, he's never going to do anything, or he's rarely going to do anything like spectacular, but he's absolutely never going to do anything stupid. Kaju is probably more aggressive, puts you in tricky spots more often, like higher intensity style probably, but as a consequence of that, he can sometimes end up making a mistake himself, or at least just ending up in a kind of out there situation. Latesky or Latesky, I think he's improved some amount over the last couple of years. He used to maybe be on the weak side, but now he's probably kind of goodish, even if only he's improved through experience. And I'm going to say that name as Espatula. I recognize the name as having been around for a while, and I assume the account belongs to a decent reg. I have a slight memory that maybe he used to be an NL pro, like way back in the midst of time. That could be wrong. He's pretty unknown to me, though. I don't really have any information on him beyond that. So we're going to dive straight into things. First hand, it's folded around to us on the button with Ace-6-3-3 nut suit. And already we have an issue in terms of seeking to use software tools to get an answer to the question which option, raising or limping, is going to be preferable, because we have asymmetric stack sizes. We're 130 deep with Danfu and 50 deep with Kaju. I'd pretty much always limp this hand versus 250 big blind stacks, I think. Probably raise versus tighter opponents. The EV of raising is higher than it would be if both players had 50 big blinds, because I lose less EV by getting 3-bet by Danfu than I would if he had 50 big blinds, basically. So getting 3-bet by Kaju is pretty much my worst case scenario. It would actually even be slightly worse if they switched seats, because then Kaju would be the more likely 3-better, and you could also 3-bet to a slightly larger amount. So in close decisions, that could even be a factor. Going over to the solver. So if both players have 50 big blinds, like we kind of need just to use tools where we can, and then extrapolate a conclusion rather than just copying one across. The hand class, a nut suit with a low pair, a single suited nut suit with a low pair, obviously ace-X, is going to limp reasonably often. There are a couple of clear trends that I can see. There's more raising with Broadway kickers, so ace-king, ace-queen, ace-jack, ace-10. Like these are doing a lot more raising, and therefore when we don't have those hands, it's obviously doing a decent amount of limping. The other hand that seems to raise more often is the 2-card zero gapper. So 7-6 always raises, 6-5, 5-4. I think that's basically just, again, because it has more EV and it loses less EV versus 3-bet. Limping also seems to occur at a higher frequency when we have two cards that don't make straight draws, such as the 9-3 combination, or I guess not 10-5, yeah, like 8-deuce, same kind of thing. So as for our combination, Ace-6-3-3, so that seems to limp at equilibrium, but we have to bear in mind that the EV of raising is going to be higher in the actual hand than in this sim. If we take it up a bit to 7-4-4, 7-4-4 raises, so we can see it's kind of close. I think it would be reasonable to just say, since the EV of raising is higher in my hand, I'm just going to go ahead and make my hand slightly stronger and see what happens, and then go with that. So I think raising is probably going to be better. but only by a very small amount, and definitely limping wouldn't be a mistake of any kind. We do open and face a 3-bet from Danfew, or even from Cashew. And again, here we have an issue because given that this is a tournament sim, the raise size I've used is 2.5x. So when Cashew 3-bets, if I call, the SPR is going to be nearly 3 still, like 2.6. Whereas if I call here against Cashew, the SPR is going to be about 1.8. And given that Cashew is just going to be shoving a lot of flops, the EV of calling a higher SPR is obviously increased because I just win more when I happen to flop the top of my range. That said, it does seem like this hand class is, I mean, even if we take that out, like the nut suit with a low pair just seems to always call, basically. So looks like we should be calling here just based on what the overall hand class does, but we went with fold, and again, I don't think that's going to be a significant error. I would definitely have called like A644. More connectivity, you flop high quality straight draws at a higher frequency, that kind of thing. Next hand. We go for raise versus Danfew. Again, this is definitely not a mistake in any meaningful sense. But if we go over to the 100 big blind sim, now obviously there's rake in this, so that's going to affect things a little bit. But again, just looking for general patterns, I see a pretty clear one when going through similar combinations. So King, Queen, Jack, 9, double suited, is mixing call and open, but mainly limping, and therefore going for the limp 3-bet pretty obviously. Knowing myself, I think that I opted to raise because I just felt like my hand didn't do great as a limp 3-bet, given that it both unblocked and performed quite poorly against Danfew's 4-betting range. I think that's fine. It also, the EV of limp 3-bet is a little bit lower at higher SPR, but general pattern wise, the trend, not the World War II American military leader. It looks like what we're doing here with hands like this is raising the combinations that can't quite open and 4-bet. So, for example, King, Queen, Jack, 9 is mainly limping and going for the limp 3-bet. King, Jack, 10, 9 is always raising because that hand wants to 4-bet. If we have King, Queen, Jack, 9, then if we do raise it and get 3-bet, we only call. And that's because we have a little bit more domination issues with the King, Queen, Jack combination. Jack 10 is just a super well-regarded combination in a 4-bet range because it doesn't suffer from domination and retains equity quite well. Even a slightly weaker or less connected variant like King, Jack 10, 8, so a 2-gapper, is also going for the open and going for the 4-bet. So it looks like not having Jack 10 in our hand means that we can't quite 4-bet, whereas even the King, Queen, Jack 9 can get in a limp 3-bet, and so that's the option the solver goes with, and that's how it's kind of more broadly organizing its ranges. But yeah, opening seems fine. On the flop, I don't think we have any reason to bet. If we're betting some 9x, this wouldn't be one of them. We don't have a flush draw block or a backdoor flush draw. Also, we can turn quite a lot of strong 2-pair outs, and we also block a few of his folds, so check seems fine. Check again seems the standard play. If I bet a little bit of 9x for block, just to fold out overcards, which wouldn't be a crazy idea. I don't know if it happens at equilibrium, but it wouldn't be an absolutely crazy notion. Then I wouldn't choose this combination. Like, this would be the last 9x that got in my betting range, basically. And so, given that I'm obviously not betting all my 9x, I feel good about checking this hand. And on the river, if I had kings or something like kings with a spade, I could maybe go for block. But this kind of hand, like even if I was blocking thin, I don't want a 9 in my hand, because if I'm blocking super thin, I'm trying to get called by a 9. And even though I have the nut 9, I don't think I have a strong enough hand to value bet. I need this hand in my checking range to sometimes check and pick off a bluff. Danfu checks back queens, which seems fine. He can maybe value bet his hand on the river. It's thin. Like, I don't think value bet is a crazy idea. He does have a spade. He does block deuce 3. Not that that's particularly relevant when I open from the small blind. The EV of checking is quite high, and it would be a pretty thin value bet. So checking is definitely not bad. I think sometimes you can maybe try and eke out a little bit of value with this combination. Maybe if you had like the queen of spades. Cold call in position. Go three-way. This guy bets flop. We're obviously done with the hand. Late ski, Leteski, cold call small blind. This should be a pretty tight connected range against MP open. People are normally not that out of line early in a 10k either, so I would assume he has like a bunch of strong connected stuff. Mid and high rundowns, Broadway pairs without an ace blocker, that kind of thing. No reason to bet flop. Again, no front door flush blocker, backdoor flush draw. I also have some amount of showdown value and some nutted turns that I hate to get check raised off. Check seems fine. Leteski, I'm just going to go with that from now on, goes with big probe. I think we have a pretty easy call. Often how these situations work, kind of crudely, especially when you're in position from an early enough position that you can have a ton of ace-x in your range, is like you call your strong flush draws and your Broadway pairs and your ace-x on this turn. And then if he barrels river, you've made it so that your range has so much ace-x that you don't really need to defend any other, any weaker combinations, at least the majority of the time. So the hand is actually kind of easy to play, unless someone's going to try and make life incredibly tough on you. And it's kind of a tricky spot for the out of position player to go absolutely crazy, because I opened MP. It's not exactly like I'm lacking in decent bluff catchers, or indeed, value. So we go with the call. River double pairs. He goes with check. I beat all his bluffs, and he's never folding a better hand. Very easy check. And he has the flop trap. I think the big sizing on the turn is good. He can apply pressure to some slightly bigger pairs, slightly better ace-x. Like, I'm calling queens, but I might be folding tens against this sizing. And I can have tens as well. You just king, jack, 10, 10, and he just makes that hand fold. So I don't think like blocking turn as him makes much sense. And he has enough, it's important that he has quite a bit of equity against my calling region, even if we narrow it to quite a bit of ace-x, because that means that he gets to fire more money into the pot, because the downside of being called by like ace, jack, 10, 9 is lower than if he just had, some random weaker hand, and therefore he gets to be more aggressive and therefore fold out some slightly better made hands. Maybe he probes smaller without a pair blocker. Like if he has 9, 7, 6, 4, maybe he has to pick a smaller sizing because his bluff isn't quite as strong. But no big deal either way. This name I kind of recognize. The fact that my initial reaction to his name and the fact that he's mim raised, soft data points that maybe he's someone I want to get involved with. Obviously, quite happy to ISO the Rainbow Aces. Danfu cold calling in position is actually, in a way, a third soft data point that this guy might be on the weak side, because I don't think Danfu in the normal course of events is going to cold call many 3-bets, even in position. And I don't think, I hope at least, that Danfu isn't going to cold call 3-bets to try and get involved in pots with me, although he may be maybe some amount better than me. Who knows? He's definitely very good. But the point is that I think this cold call is like, I want to try and get involved with this opener. So yeah, starting to get relatively confident that this guy might be someone we want to play pots against. We end up in a 3-way 3-bet pot. Flop. This is kind of tricky because we have the ace of clubs, which is nice, but the board isn't great for either of their ranges, although, either of them can have a combination like 8, 7, 6 pretty easily. We do unblock everything else to do with the board other than the ace of clubs, though. I think if we had a combination like the ace of clubs, ace, king, king, it becomes quite an easy check because like a lot of the hands that we still beat at this point are going to be king, king, queen, queen type, like other Broadway pairs, basically. I would imagine that ace, ace with a double pair, even with the ace of clubs, probably doesn't do that much betting three-way. I can have better combinations to bet, like ace of clubs, ace 7, blocking some straight draws, ace of clubs, ace 6, or ace 5, blocking some pairs. So I would imagine this might be a check in solver land. I think bet is okay, like small bet is okay in the real world. It's a little bit of a lazy heuristic, but small bets are just usually going to do better multi-way than some solvers might think. And with the exception of combinations like 9, 8, 7, 6, which are definitely in play, the ranges are broadly quite high card heavy. You know, this guy opened MP, this guy cold call button. You know, a lot of the hands that they have are going to be king, king, queen, jack, or this guy can just have any king, king. Blocking 2 10s isn't great. For me, it's like another small reason against betting because some of the hands that I'm hoping they have is like queen, jack, 10, 9. Like obviously I crushed that hand, but like actually getting to showdown against some of those hands might be problematic, and my hand is somewhat vulnerable to being bluffed, so I'm more concerned with generating folds, I think. I might be more inclined to check this hand if it was a later position encounter, but this guy opening MP probably means that I do well enough against him on this board that I get to put a small bet in and put Damfew in a little bit of a tricky situation, because Damfew definitely doesn't want to peel, and then this guy check raises, which he definitely can. So Damfew will probably overfold a lot or overfold a bit, and this guy doesn't have very much to do with the flop, would be a more succinct summary of that spot. Go with small bet and get it through. Open the 10, 10, 9, 7, and in the replay, at least get snap 3-bet by Damfew. We can do a pre-flop checkup, but I'm pretty sure that every 10, 10, 9, 9, 9, 8 type stuff is going to defend, even with tighter ranges in play. The combinations I'm typically going to fold here are more like the Broadway pairs, you know, the kings fold a lot, queens fold a lot, like that kind of thing. 10, 10, 9 just basically doesn't fold, 9, 9, 8, 8, 8, 7. Like all of these hands are just not doing much folding. So, cool seems fine. On the flop, I think this is a flop that I do quite well on. Given that I opened... I say that, but then obviously I am folding a lot of king-king combinations. That said, I still do have a lot of like queen-jack 10-9 kind of stuff. And I haven't opened very many low card hands from MP, so I don't have many complete breaks apart from strongly connected double suited hands like 8, 7, 6, 5. And those just aren't combinatorically very much of my range, even though my range is quite small. I think that a set plus a flush draw makes a very good leading candidate because I block a lot of Damfew's C-bets, basically. A lot of his C-bets are going to be like ace, queen, jack, 10 with a flush draw, or ace, ace, jack with a flush draw. Obviously, like hands with 10s and spades in them are just going to have some amount of equity and polarity on this texture. I think when I have a hand like mine, I skew him more towards like ace, ace, king, 5 that can check back, or just a random hand with it that's a lot more likely to put money in the pot by calling, basically. If we do just a quick overview of Broadway textures and like 2 Broadway textures and 3-bet pots. So king jack 7 will be 1. And just look at how often we're leading like set plus flush draw, basically. Not top set, because that kind of crushes the board, but so our lead frequency here is 25 something percent. And if I say we have jacks and clubs, we end up leading basically always. Take another one. King 10, 7 is obviously way too similar. Queen, jack, deuce will do. Actually, we can keep it the same then, just jack, jack, and hearts now. So 15% lead, and yeah, so it looks like there's no need to numerous iterations of that exercise. Like, that's enough to show that that hand class does quite a bit of leading, and we can just assume that even if we're meant to check sometimes, leading can't exactly be bad. We go with small lead. A lot of our leads are going to be small on this kind of texture. Challenge him to find marginal defends, so on and so forth. On the turn, I think we have to bet again. Like, we can't expect him to have very many bets. I mean, he's not exactly going to have a ton of like King 7, but those few combinations that he may have had, we remove more from. I think he still just has a ton of one pair stuff that at least sometimes checks back. Like, he's smart enough that he's not going to think, okay, so I check to him, let's say, and he has like ace jack 3. I'll pot it and punish draws kind of thing. Like, if I'm checking a balanced range to him, then he can't start potting hands like that. They just don't have enough equity. Don't have enough equity against my continuing range. They obviously suffer massively from getting check raised, and the EV of checking is quite high. So those hands are checking back quite a bit. I guess, he can have a few hands he can definitely have a few hands that bet, but I think overall I'm going to do better by betting. I think I want to bet a size where I can have bet folds, both so that it looks like I can have bet folds, but just like, so structurally I want to build a range that has bet folds. I definitely get some of this SPR. If I barrel, I can think of some bluffs I can have. Like, I can have King, Queen, Queen 9 would be a great hand to lead flop with, and I probably don't want to check that on turn. I probably want to keep barreling. And there are other similar candidates. So yeah, I think I want to bet like 2/3 pot here. That still enables me that still gets the SPR under 1, so I can shove river, should I choose to do so. We go with pot, which is like fine. I think smaller would be better. Pot is just, the only thing is it makes it look, actually no, that's kind of dumb logic against someone like that. If you like, against some people, you can use the logic that, hey, look at me, potting my draw to apply maximum pressure. Your aces are still the best hand, kind of thing. But that's just not going to be a thing in this circumstance. He does cool. And on the river, I think the 2 spades should incline me towards barreling. It just makes it that much more likely he has a hand somehow like ace jack 9, no spade, which always peels flop versus my sizing. Then peels turn, makes a double gut shot, and then can end up being an okay bluff catcher with no spade on the river. The idea is that you get to bet thinner or bet more aggressively for value on the river when you block missed draws, because then your opponent's bluff catchers often have good removal effects. Like, I have 2 spades, so he's more likely going to have 0 spades in his hand, and therefore it looks like I can have a bunch of flush draws. I don't think he bluffs much versus check, because I think he struggles to have enough hands that lose to my check folds. Like, my check folding range is pretty weak at this point. And whilst he will bluff quite a bit of stuff, I think that's just because he'll have, like 4% of his range that actually needs to bluff. And so, yeah, why not bluff all of it? King X doesn't matter because I stack that either way. Yeah, he has a bunch of like ace king, ace whatever. Yeah, a bunch of hands that sometimes call and never bet. So I think shove is the clear play with SPR 0.6 or so. And we get it through. Well, we don't get it through. We were winning, but we win the pot. Cashew opens, and we have a pretty straightforward defend. Like, this hand suffers as we start to face tighter and tighter pre-flop ranges. It might be a fold against full pot, even in a 0 rake environment. It's definitely close. But versus 2.7x, we're getting enough of a good price that I think calling has to be at least reasonable. So we do go with call and pretty bad flop for our range, decent one for our hand. Check, and he goes with big C bet on his 10-3 flush draw. Now, I think I definitely have to have some check raises here. This is something I've talked about, I think, in other content. if I don't have check raises, then he gets to bet a wider amount of it, or a wider and wider region of his distribution for more EV. So it's not like I'm check raising because I'm incredibly excited to get money in here with quite a lot of hands, but it's just the difference between, like, let's say that if I check raise an appropriate frequency on this board, I would guess, versus his range, something like 7%, 6-7%, maybe a little bit more even. Silver's surprisingly aggressive in these situations. But even if you want to chill out a bit and take it down to some hands that you feel a little bit more comfortable with, maybe you end up with about 6, 7, 8%. Maybe then your opponent gets to bet 80-85% of his range and capture 65% pot share. Versus if you play 0% check raise, he gets to bet his entire range and win 68% pot share. So by attempting to limit the damage, you're actually increasing it. Like, being passive isn't going to be a route to success in a lot of situations. You know, it's kind of like curling up into a ball and hoping that the guy with the massive range and polarity advantage doesn't run over you and takes it easy on you. That's not going to happen in this context or in a range of others. So you have to fight back with at least some hands, even on boards that look pretty bad for your range. I don't think this hand is a great candidate for it because given that he does have so many strong made hands and high equity draws, I need a check raise range that retains equity against his very best hands, and this hand is kind of the antithesis of that. You know, like I'm doing okay against his c-betting range, but if we narrow it down to the hands he bets and then gets in, or even bet call the check raise with, I start to do a lot worse. Often the mechanic in these situations is you basically never check raise hands like mine without a flush draw blocker. I think that's close enough that I'm fine going with it in this situation, given that I'm not exactly excited about the idea of check raising anyway. We go with call. I don't have any leads on this turn. I may on some others. Check and he checks back, and the river is deuce of hearts. Now, this got kind of interesting. I remember running this hand after it had actually occurred. We check. He bets a little bit over 60% pot. This is going to be a very common bet size preference for the imposition player here. You cap your range by checking back turn, and so your river betting range is like non-nutted value bets that do well by widening my calling range, and bluffs without nut blockers that do well putting in a little bit less money. So all of that contributes to a sizing around half pot region is typically going to be preferred on this kind of run out, like texture shift and then he IP check and then the river's a brick. Now, my decision, I think, is kind of close. I think hands like mine don't do a lot of calling without a club. If I don't have a Broadway, if I don't have a king or a jack, I think my hand is kind of a clear fold. With a king and for whatever, like I guess I block 4-5 as well, which you can occasionally have. There's a little bit of something. I eventually went with call. I do perceive Casu as the kind of opponent against whom I need to be careful not to overfold nodes where I feel like my range is more than averagely defined and capped. And here I do look like I have a lot of, aces up, and don't really have all that many super strong made hands, although I can definitely check some flushes. The problem here is that if I have the nut flush, then I also remove some combinations of straights, which might check back turn and bet river. So I'm probably a little bit less than averagely incentivized to check the top of my range, although I will still do so sometimes. It being a live hand, I may also have felt like I picked something up, or may have happened to run into his bluffing region with a hand that I shouldn't be calling with long term. But that's kind of by the by. Like, I think my decision is kind of close. What I want to draw your attention to is his river bluff. This is a kind of an expert level bluff, I think. Maybe I'm overstating it, and it's actually one that a lot of people find. But I think a lot of people here in his shoes would think, okay, so I have two pair, I block some of his mid flushes. Like the 10 clubs removes a lot of my flushes. The king of diamonds blocks some broadways. Maybe I in the big blind have a hand like Ace-7, 6-5 or whatever with backdoor spades that I check, like the Queen 10 now beats. why don't I just check this hand back and, win my share of the pot? Like, I've got worse hands to bluff with, kind of thing. Like, sure, if he had a hand like his with a club blocker and a Broadway blocker and a pair blocker, but without two pair, then that's obviously bluffing. But bluffing a hand like this is kind of interesting, but it is also definitely correct. So I'm going to resurrect a sim I ran a little while after the hand. So we have no leads on this turn. He checks back. Apparently he does a whole lot of checking back. I would have guessed he has a few more bets than this, but he's checking like the vast majority of his range. Then the river is a brick. We check, and he has king, queen, 10, 9. And as you can see, it's always bluffing. I would imagine, therefore, if he had like jack, 10, 9, again, always bluffing. So the combination of a flush blocker, a straight blocker, and two pair blockers makes his hand basically always a bluff. Now, I think the lesson here is to be very conscious of when showdown value is illusory. The reason that this hand is bluffing pure when it blocks a club, checking when it doesn't, fair enough, but bluffing pure with this blocker, even when it has two pair, is that my range as the out of position player is actually kind of strong. Like, once I check call big c-bet on this texture, and this is the run out, I don't have very many hands worse than queen 10. And if I have a flush draw, it got there. If I had a straight draw, it either got there or it's a hand that I'm almost certainly bluffing on river. It really looks like I have I'm just going to have a whole bunch of hands like ace 10, ace queen. If we go back to me on the river, how often do I have worse than queen 10? Basically never. And when I do have worse than queen 10, I'm always bluffing it. Most of my range is going to be kind of the two pairs here, so ace 10, ace queen, and then I have king jack at some frequency, and then I have quite a lot of flushes. And it's worth noting here that I'm probably a little bit less than averagely incentivized to check a flush, because if I have the nut flush that goes for a check raise, I also block some straights that he can be value betting with. So I'm a little bit more incentivized than usual to go to bet all my value. There are definitely situations here where the out of position player will check like 40% of their flushes. So here I'm betting most of my flushes. So my checking range does become quite capped, but it also just becomes very condensed in slightly stronger made hands than queen 10. And so once I check, given that I'm always bluffing worse than queen 10 because of where I am in my own range, I don't have, let's say, worse than ace 10. That's only worse than 20% of the time, and it's mostly bluffing. His queen 10 might be two pair, but it has basically no EV if check back. What it does have is a whole bunch of useful blockers, which are therefore well utilized as river bluffs. So I thought this was a pretty cool bluff, and definitely not one that everyone would see. It also made me wonder if Caju had done a fair amount more work with solvers than I'd previously given him credit for. So I think this is very much like a solver land bluff. I think it's a play that you can easily miss if you haven't done a lot of work, because it's founded on being aware of what both players' ranges look like in relatively accurate detail. And definitely, it's just super easy for him to check this hand back and, hope he somehow wins, but actually going for the bluff. And then if people do bluff this hand, then I could see them going big and thinking, well, and it is often correct, actually. If I'm turning a made hand into a bluff, then I should usually go large, because the EV of checking is quite high, and therefore I want to use, I want to exert a ton of pressure. I don't want to get called a bunch by his slightly better hands. Whilst that's true, the reason he goes small in this case is both because the EV of checking is basically 0, and because obviously his range doesn't want to have large bets at a particularly high frequency. And therefore, I was kind of doubly impressed that he bluffed this hand, and that he bluffed this hand for that sizing. Because I think both of those are things that can definitely get missed. And if he bluffs for pot, he ends up putting in too much money with a lot of bluffs, and I've still, I've checked a range that can combat that. And if he checks the hand back, then he's literally just waving the white flag. On to the next hand. Going with limp with a lot of tri-suited combinations. It's a simplification I've had in place for a while. From what I remember, it's pretty solver approved, so it seems fine. Flop, I guess I can bet, but I definitely can't bet everything. Checking no pair, no draw seems fine. Turn showdown value, but a very depolarized river equity distribution, so check again seemed reasonable. Danview goes with big bet. I think I probably have to defend the nut 10. I do unblock a ton of straight draws as well, which is nice. Yeah, I think given the amount of better hands than ace 10 that I'm betting, I probably just about need to continue this. I would definitely rather continue a hand with worse showdown value and better river distribution, like ace 8, 7, 6 maybe, even though that's just a gut shot. Ace jack 9, 7 definitely I'd rather have. So maybe I fold weaker 10s, but just defend the ace 10 specifically. That seems kind of fine. Or at least close. River, he goes with big bet. The thing is here, well, this is a couple of things. Firstly, he can definitely be bluffing 7x on turn. He can bluff his weaker 7x on turn. Like, he checked in the big blind, so he has a ton of hands that you never even think to include in someone's range in most circumstances. You know, he can just have 7, 4, 4, 3 and decide to take a shot at it. Secondly, you know, he made a big bet on turn, so he tightened my range quite a bit, and he's made a big bet on river, so I don't need to defend, you know, all that wide. I don't have a lot of kings, maybe, like, in my turn range once I check, but once I call a full pot size bet, if we say that I have a bluff catcher on river, quite a lot of my potential cooldowns are going to be king X. So if I occasionally call a 10, I think that's fine, and I do have an okay combination, unblocking, you know, jacks, 9s, 8s. I have 6, I guess, whatever that matters. I think I'm mostly folding this hand. Like, I guess the only thing is, like, I guess I would rather have this hand to call with than a hand like King Jack 8, 6, blocking a ton of his bluffs. But also, I don't know how, like, he's smart enough both to trim bluffs from his range and to recognize that he probably doesn't want multiple straight cards in his own, busted straight draw cards in his own bluffing range all that often. So, I feel like this is a little bit value heavy. And also the blind versus blind dynamic, you know, you get suspicious cooldowns quite a lot. So, I mean, just, it feels a bit to me like there's a 7x that does a lot of bluffing on turn and then is a slam dunk river bet for this size. So, I think folding's fine. I'd have to call most, if not all, of my kings, and maybe like a smattering of 10s, but folding all of them is probably not going to be, like, if I think that Danview's a bit, like, maybe I'm meant to call, you know, 10, 15% of my 10x, and then I can just lose those hands from my range if I think that he's a little bit value heavy here, which I kind of do just because of how the boards run out. I think this is a pretty easy call against, like, my hand has some gaps and a tri-suit, but it does have a nut suit and some strong connectivity, and I'm closing the action. And I think flop lead is going to work pretty well multi-way. A lot of their strong-made hands on this texture, I actually have reasonable blockers to, because when under the gun opens and MP calls, and this is the flop, if they do have something decent, then it's going to be like, you know, ace 9, 8, 7, 10, 9, 8, 6. And I have reasonable removal against those hands, so they probably end up with a few more, like, paired and unpaired Broadway combinations that are very vulnerable to pressure. And even without the removal, like 754 Rainbow is a pretty disastrous board for these two ranges anyway. I also think if I bet small, like, I have the right kind of equity distribution, I can barrel some turns like spades and 10s. If I bet now, I also sandwich Danview, so he can fold stuff like ace, queen, queen, 3. Yeah. Lead feels like it worked pretty well. We do go with lead and get called in 2 spots by the 2 ranges that did awfully on this board, apparently. Turn, we're just pure giving up. Like, someone has a 7, basically, always. Checks through. River, we're never bluffing. Someone still has a 7 a lot. If they don't have a 7, they have a flush a lot. If they don't have a flush, they have a straight a lot. We have, like, even the hands that we'd be trying to make fold, like, we kind of block with the 9-8 combination now, so just giving up always. And yeah, Damview had basically what he's meant to have, and Kazu had a hand that probably has to sometimes call. This might even be a flush. Like, if he had the 10 high flush, he maybe even folds. Maybe he thinks he beats the odd super thin value bet. I think you have to beat the odd value bet if you're going to pure call this hand, because it doesn't do that fantastically, unblocking all the full houses and stuff like that. Leteski calls in the big blind. Flop, we want to c-bet. We have a pair blocker. We have some like blockers to his strong draws. Get peeled by a bunch of stuff. He goes with check raise, which is not that much fun for us. The thing is, at SPR 5, he's still not going to have that many strong made hands. He's going to fold. I open cutoff for full pot, so he's meant to fold quite a lot of 7-3, 7-deuce, pocket threes, pocket deuces. He can maybe check raise some 7x, like 7x with backdoors. He can check raise something like 10-10, 5-4 that I'm actually, with my specific combination, doing really well against. If he has a set or two pair, I'm in pretty bad shape, but I think it's way easier for him to find like 5-4-3 or 9-8-7-5, like that kind of thing, and just decide to go with it and apply, because it looks like I have kind of a lot of overpairs here. I'm not going to flop, sets and stuff very often on this board either, so it's a board where he can look to apply pressure with an equity disadvantage but a polarity advantage. We get it in, and he does end up with 7-3. I think this is okay-ish. Pair blocker matters, backdoor flush draw, backdoor nut flush draw matters, backdoor straight draws matter. I think it's fine-ish. If I had like a non-nut backdoor flush draw and no backdoor straight, like a different ace-ace combination, like ace-ace 10-3 with the 10 high clubs, then I could maybe see bet folding or checking back even. But this hand's just got a little bit too much to do with the board, and this board should have a little bit too little to do with his range, basically. Pretty easy to defend. Flop the nuts. This seems like the kind of combo that does both things at some frequency. A lot of 9x is going to mix on a texture this dry, actually. I block some of his 9x because I have Jack 10, and like a lot of his opens that have a 9 are going to have the cards that wrap around the 9, so he has a little bit less super strong value that pays me. I do unblock all the strong overpairs, no other Broadway cards. I think both options are reasonable. We go with check raise and get called. Turns in Solverland play kind of interestingly on dry paired textures after check raise. From what I've seen, there's a surprising amount of small betting. I think because once we check raise 9-9-3 rainbow, if we start like blasting away on turn and then maybe blasting away on river, it gets to the point where he only needs to defend like full houses to be defending often enough. If, for example, we check raise here on the flop, and let's say we don't have 9-3, let's say we have like ace jack 10-9. So we check raise flop, we bomb turn, and then the river is like a 7, and we shove. I don't even think we're beating half his calling range, or at least the calling range that he should be using, because maybe ace 9 specifically ties quite a bit. If we make it even a pip weaker, so king 9, I just think we value own ourselves a lot if we go check raise pot. I think the idea of going small and then actually often small again on the river, like you go third to a half pot on turn and then maybe like half pot on river, is you actually give him a tougher time if he has like aces. You actually make it so that he has to maybe defend those hands sometimes. If you go large, then you just make it too easy for him. So we end up bombing it. Knowing myself, I think what I was thinking was the SPR's around 4, and I want to be able to get all the money in. So I don't want to like bet third pot, and then the river SPR is 2, and I can't stack him if he has something that pays off. But even that thought process kind of speaks to, like, that thought process is only born out of someone who has a value bet. When you do have big bets in this spot, it seems to be reserved for more dynamic textures, where like 995 flush draw, and then Queen X turn you would have large bets, because in position then has more non-trip stuff that can continue, like, you know, overpair plus flush draw. He also has more hands that have equity against our non-nutted value region. Like if he has a flush draw and we have a lot of trips, we still gain by making him fold, whereas we obviously don't gain by making him fold flush draws here. So, yeah, I think this was a sizing error on my part. He folds. We go squeeze and get called. And this is not a fun spot. SPR 3.5 is high enough to, you know, to matter quite a bit if we're putting a bunch of money in the pot with hands that basically can't improve. I think this is probably small bet fold or check fold. If this is a heads up pot where he opens, we 3-bet and he calls, I think we either small bet fold or like check fold versus large, check call versus small. But given that it's a squeezed pot where he was the caller, I think I get some more shoves because he has more like Broadway pairs, basically. Like when he cold calls in position and then calls again, he just has that much more, you know, king, king, queen, queen, jack, jack, obviously by that logic, but combinatorically he has more of the other pairs. He shouldn't have much like jack 4 or anything like that, so if I do get it in, it's often against like jack X of hearts, which I'm not doing great against, but I'm not crushed by either. I remember potting this hand, but I remember potting it because I remember taking a look at it afterwards and deciding that it would have been spewy against someone who'd opened and called a 3-bet, but was probably just about okay against someone who cold called in position and then called again. We bet, get it in, and run it, and outdraw this hand. I mean, yeah, this is obviously getting in on the flop, and we ran pretty good against it. I don't think it's meant to cold call pre-flop with a deuce, even in 0 rake, and even against 3x as opposed to 3.5x. I think my line is just barely okay. Like, if we make the SPR any larger, or if we make my hand any weaker, or if we make the board any, you know, more like a board that interacts with him in terms of him making more 2-pair, then I think my line gets bad pretty quickly. As it is, I think it could have been slightly bad, but not by much, and probably is just about okay, given that, you know, I can get it in against a bunch of hands that are flipping, that I'm flipping against, so I win like a little bit of the pot back, but that's better. Like, my equity realization if I check is just really quite bad. So maybe I just want to bet fold this. It's going to be close between bet fold and like small bet fold and big bet get in. I feel like both lines are pretty close. But yeah, if the board were like Jack 6-5, for example, then, or Jack 7-5 even, but like if he has any more like 2-pair and wraps and stuff that can get it in, then this gets spewy pretty quick. So if this is a shove, it's one of the like the last textures that I get to shove before I have to before I can no longer play my hand for stacks. This again could be a limp. We're still pretty deep with Danfew, but I'm kind of cautious about the low suits. The low suit works both ways because I can fold out more better flush draws, but it also just my hand loses more EV if 3-bet. The 10-5, like, I'd probably be raise folding this actually. We can do a little bit of digging. So let's say we have a single suited hand with like a higher pair now. So let's say jacks, 10s, 9s, no ace. So it looks like it's no ace even. Yeah, looks like it's doing quite a bit of limping with a king. So let's see how much the suit matters. So king XX. Yeah, it looks like the higher suits do more limping because they gain more from keeping lower flush draws in the pot. Yeah, it looks like we started to do just more folding with those hands. King 10-10 combination. Yeah, King 10-10 combination looks like it's always raising. No matter what the other side cards are. But if I say we have King 10-10 here, then yeah, looks like we start to develop some limps with the more disconnected combinations that have the king high flush draw. But the mechanic's pretty clear. Like, we want to fold out more hands, or we want to play the hand as a straight steal when we have the lower flush draws, because we gain more by pushing hands out of the pot, and like ending up in a three-way pot is much worse for us with a 10 high flush draw than a king high flush draw kind of thing. And then if we do raise, we're folding the disconnected ones and calling the more connected ones. So this hand looks like it's a solver advocating raise fold, and the EV of raising is probably higher in reality because Dan Few can't play quite as aggressively against open, so we go with open, which looks good. Catchy calls. Flop, I think I can go both ways. We block some of his draws. Our hand benefits from denying equity to his unpaired overcards. Equally, I probably bet this with a king high flush draw just because it's just that much higher EV to get him to call a weaker flush draw and a weaker pair maybe. Or a weaker flush draw and a draw that we block kind of thing. So I think probably check back might be slightly better with this hand because it's just so much more towards the middle of our range. Calls. Now I think we have a clear check. And on the river, I think we have a pretty clear value bet now. Well, I mean, a hand's not great at getting paid off with a 5 blocker and everything, but I think blind versus, well, like in a late position encounter, our hand just becomes too strong now, and blocking the king is also kind of nice because he just has a few less check raises. And we can just definitely bet. Like, he's, just as I was conscious of the need not to overfold when my range is kind of defined and capped, so I would imagine would he be. And I can get looked up by some other stuff. I would imagine quite a few of his weaker flushes, or some of his weaker flushes, can bet river. So, yeah, he has this could have turned itself into a check raise on the river, to be fair, and I think maybe that's what I was a little bit afraid of, but if so, blocking a king is a little bit good. I think this is a pretty clear river value bet. Okay, I think this is a pretty decent place to wrap up the first part. As always, questions, comments, feedback, gratefully received in the thread below or elsewhere. Let me know what you thought of the format, and until next time, it's been Richard Grieco for RunItOnce.com. Take care.